Hey Roosters, and welcome back to another video. Today we'll be teaching you how to play the My Hero Academia collectible card game. Or of course you may know it as Universus, but that's okay because the rules of both games are very similar and this video will teach you how to play both. Okay, so in the My Hero Academia collectible card game, or of course, Universus, you're going to play as a character. And now your character is going to fight your opponent's character. In the MHA format, it's strictly MHA v MHA, but in the Wider Universus system, you can pit other characters against MHA characters. So yes, you can make Bakugo and Scorpion fight. So what is your job in this game? Simple. Reduce your opponent's health to 0. It's very simple. Let's talk about setting up the game and the field you're going to be playing on. To play the game, you're going to need your own character, your own deck, and some way to track your health. On the field, you'll have a character that you've already chosen before you even start building your deck. And this character you'll be playing as, you'll have space for your momentum, and that will be energy you build up throughout the game. Don't worry, I'll talk about it later. You'll have a deck, a pre-constructed deck that you'll bring to the game of a certain amount of cards. You'll have a discard pile where all your discarded cards go to, and then forget that, you'll have your staging area, and it'll be somewhere around your character. That'll be where assets and foundations go. This may also be called your stage. You may see it worded that way in some places. And for real, finally, you'll have your card pool. Now, your card pool is where you'll be, playing cards. And each card you play will get progressively harder by a certain amount, depending on how many other cards you've played during your turn. This is called progressive difficulty, and I'll talk about it later. In your field, this needs to look exactly like the one I have on screen. There are a multitude of different types of cards in the game, and they really boil down to a main 3. All cards will have a name, difficulty for playing the card. Some will have a block value, and they all will have a control value for playing other cards. They'll have resource symbols for deck building and special abilities to help you get through the game. They'll also each have a card type indicator. Attacks and characters are easily the most unique. They each have their own special symbols that you won't find on other cards. The other 3 look the same, but I will explain how they're different. Let's start with talking about the character. Yes, this is an outdated card, but I can use it for the sake of the example. Every card has a name and also an indicator to tell you what version of this character that it is. For this image, it's the amount of dot before and after its name, but in the new updated Universus cards, you'll find a Roman numeral and its card type indicator. Every character has a hand size value, which will be in the green. This amount of cards you'll draw until you have at the start of every one of your turns. You also have a health value. Now, this is the amount of damage your opponent wants to deal to you so he can win the game. You have resource symbols which decide what cards you can put in your deck when deck building, but their rules vary from format to format, so I'll talk about that a little later. Your characters will have abilities that will probably change exactly how you build your deck with exactly what cards. You can also include characters in your deck, and that's what these symbols are for, but I won't really be talking about that in this video because it's not really done. Your card will also have a symbol to show what set it's from. To talk about the next 4 types of cards, you have to talk about playing cards in general, because you kind of need to play the cards to be able to use them. Playing cards in Universus system is a little unorthodox, but it's simple, so let's take a look. The card pool is important in the Universus system because it makes each card you attempt to play harder. Let's say you want to play this back-to-back. And so you place it in the card pool and attempt to play it. I say attempt because in the Universus system, you don't always know if you'll be able to play a card or not. It's not a fixed resource system like in Magic or something. To get a better understanding of this, let's take a look at the card back to back, or more importantly, the number in its top left hand. This value is known as difficulty, and this is the value we'll be testing against in an attempt to play the card. To make a test or a check, you want to take your deck and discard the top card of it. Then you want to look at the number that is shown in the bottom right hand corner. That number is called the control, and that's the number you could be comparing to the difficulty. In this case, the card was successfully played, but it won't leave your card pool just yet. It needs to stay there until the end of the turn. So the last card was successful, a control that was equal to or greater than its difficulty. So let's try to play another card. This turn to dust, and let's take a closer look at its difficulty and how this card will resolve. So this card has a difficulty of 5, so surely that's what we'll be testing against. So let's take our decks and discard the top card of it, and let's see how it turns out. So we hit a 5 control, which means the card should be played, right? No, wrong. Remember we said for each card already in your card pool, each card will become progressively harder to play. And this holds true, meaning that this does not have a difficulty of 5. It actually has a difficulty of 6, meaning that the 5 we checked is not good enough to play the card. Look, I know what you're thinking. There must be some way to correct a failed check. And I have some good news for you. You're correct. there are ways to correct a failed check. So let's talk about them, shall we? To do this, you have to subscribe. No, you use your characters in your foundations, but you should really subscribe though. Correct checks, you need to know the difference between a ready card, cards that can be used, and committed cards, 90-degree cards that can't be used. By committing any ready character or foundation, you can add +1 control to your check for each character or foundation that you committed in this way. With the new 6 control against our 6th difficulty, we now successfully played the card. And you can play as many cards as you want during your turn until you pass, or of course fail the check, which will result in your turn ending forcefully, the cards you failed to play being discarded. And that's all there is to playing cards. Let's talk about the pieces that no player can go without, the building blocks of every deck in the Universus system. Let's talk about foundations. Foundations are very simple to use, but also very important when playing the game, so let's have a closer look about their attributes. They of course have a name, resource symbols for deck building, difficulty and control, special abilities and keywords, and may or may not have a block value. These gray bordered cards are known for doing one thing, committing to give +1 to a check. For example, say you're checking a card and you need a 5, you hit a 3, you need to add +2, pop 1, pop 2 foundations, and there you go, successfully played card. Foundations abilities are only usable in your staging area, not in your card pool. We talked about how you can build up your character, so now let's talk about how you can knock down your opponents. The best way to knock your rival down a peg or two is by dealing damage to them. The best way to deal damage? Play attacks. Attacks denoted by their orange borders have the same attributes you'd find on any other card. They have a name, difficulty, controls, resources, special abilities, a block modifier, but what makes them special is there are 2 special symbols, and these 2 symbols are detrimental to their ability to deal damage. These 2 values are known as the card speed and damage values. The first of which is the speed, and this determines how hard it will be for your opponent to block the attack. Speed comes in 3 basic types: high, mid, and low. As the speed zone determines what types of blocks your opponent can use against the attack, the speed's number determines how hard it will be for your opponent to block the attack overall. This will all make a lot more sense when we start talking about blocks. And the damage is simple. It's how much damage you do to your opponent when the attack hits. We all guessed it. So let's say you want to play a long-lasting explosion, and let's just say you pass a check without any problems. What comes next? Well, the answer is the enhanced step. The enhanced step is when we get a chance to buff our attack over on the offensive, or reduce the problems we'll have blocking on the defensive. The advanced enhances can be found on all types of cards, and this is the time you can use those abilities. Thing to remember about enhances. Enhances on committed cards are unplayable, unusable, so make sure you keep in mind what cards you're committing when committing cards to get added to checks. Unless the ability states otherwise, this is always the rule. During the enhanced step, players always go back and forth activating enhanced abilities, starting with the person who played the attack. Now, if you decide to pass your enhance, which you can do, then you're not out of it, not completely. As long as your opponent does not pass exactly after you, the next time your chance to pass an enhance or play an enhance comes around, you can still play an enhance. Once both players pass consecutively, it's time to block. Now, blocking this game, I'm pretty sure, is where everybody gets the misconception that this game is complicated and difficult. Yeah, a lot of people walk out on Universus system, but it's not hard. It's actually quite simple once you get the hang of it. So let's take a closer look at the block modifier on a card, the one we've been talking about throughout this entire video. Just as the speed value on an attack comes in 3 kinds, so does the block modifier. They come in, of course, high, mid, and low. And of course they correspond to each other when talking about blocking. Highs block highs, mids block mids, and lows blocks lows. You get the point. But every block can half block one zone away, only block half the damage. So a high can half block a mid, but a low can't half block a high. Let's take a look at an example. There's a 4 speed high, 5 damage attack coming in, and we only have 3 health, so we better protect ourselves pretty well. There is no room for failure. If we block with a high, we take no damage. Because the blast is aiming high, we block high. When we block with a mid, we still take half the damage. In the game, you can't even attempt to block a high with a low, and it makes sense. To summarize, highs can block highs, but only half block mids. Mids can block mids, but only half block everything else. And lows can block lows, but can only half block mids. We talked about what can block what, but now let's talk about how you actually play these blocks. As long as the zones of the attacks match up, you add the speed value plus the block modifier value, and that's really what you need to hit. That's the difficulty of the block that you need to check from the top of your deck. Well, also you need to add in progressive difficulty. So in this situation, we'll have a progressive difficulty plus our speed, which is 5, plus our block modifier, which is 1, which will equal 6. And that's the difficulty that we have to test against. That's the check we have to make. Yes, your cards do clear at the end of your turn. They all go to their respective places depending on how they resolve throughout your actual turn. But you could play multiple blocks on your turn, and for each block you play, they'll get progressively harder. So you can have progressive difficulty on your opponent's turn. And you'll treat a block check just like you'll treat any other check in the game. You'll take your deck, flip the top card, hit the control, add any modifiers by committing any cards, foundations, or characters to hit the check. If you fail a block check, discard the card you used to block and just treat it as if you never blocked in the first place. Then it's your damage step, in which all the damage dealt by the attack will be done to the defender. When your card pool clears at the end of your turn, attacks that dealt damage will go to your momentum to be used later, and attacks that didn't do damage will go to your discard pile. Every iconic hero has its weapons, and in the Universus system it's no different. But in this game, the weapons of each and every hero you play as are represented by asset cards. Assets, known for their green borders, are simple, and I'll give it to you straight. They're foundations, except you cannot commit them to add +1 to checks. Seems like a bad deal, right? Well, not always. Usually they'll have pretty powerful effects to make up for this major downside. Every hero's powers and abilities aren't always used to simply punch somebody in the face. In the Universus system, it's no different. Actions are used to represent powers and abilities used for other things than just smacking somebody at the top of the head. Action cards seem to be just foundation cards, but unlike asset cards, they cut a little deeper than that. They can only be played when a similar ability is played for one-use effects, and then at the end of your turn, they stay for progressive difficulty, then at the end of your turn, they're discarded. For example, the enhance on this card can only be used during the enhance step in place of your enhance. Throughout the game, we talk about different abilities a card could have. Card abilities really come in 4 types: a enhance, a response, a form, or of course, a passive ability. Enhance abilities can only be activated during the enhance step. Response abilities tell exactly what they respond to and when they can be activated. Form abilities can be activated during your combat phase, which is when you play your attacks and your foundations. Passive abilities are active basically since you play the card. If an ability has something before it, that is just another prerequisite that your character has to have to allow you to play that ability. For example, this Bakugo response. It's a response that can only be used by Bakugo, or as your character's name is Bakugo. There are some other ones as well, such as First Enhance, which is a common one, which means that'll be the first enhance to use, or Deadlock Form. To be in Deadlock means that your opponent has 10 or more cards in their staging area. And some abilities may have symbols or resource symbols before them, which basically means your character has to have that symbol or resource symbol on it to be able to use that ability. A lot of abilities have costs that need to be used to use that ability. They're different from prerequisites, but basically you know what's the cost and what's the ability, because after the cost there will be a colon than the rest of the actual ability. Abilities on foundations and assets cannot be used while they're in your card pool, only when they're in your staging area, and as attacks and actions, on the other hand, their abilities can only be used in your card pool and not when they're anywhere else. A lot of abilities have been shortened into singular words, and that lets you know that that's a keyword ability. Now, keyword abilities are not really different from normal abilities, except you need to really know what they do to know how to use them. Some abilities may have numbers after the keyword, and that basically is just a way to scale up the power of the ability and scale down the power of the ability depending on what number, how high the value is. For example, Powerful 2 basically means you can discard as many momentum you want and gain +2 damage for each momentum discarded. The 2 denotes that it's +2 damage and not a different number. Now, same thing with Breaker 1, which means that after you use this card to block, then the next card your opponent tries to play this turn will be +1 difficulty. The easiest way to explain form keyword abilities is that they activate as they form exactly when you play the card, which means they're more like passive abilities than form abilities. So these abilities activate the second you play the card, and they're always active and change how the card moves throughout the game. Then there are just keywords, no abilities attached, just keywords that are referenced by other cards for different effects. At this point, you should know how to build up your character and how to also knock your opponent's character down. So let's see how this all comes together. Every turn has 3 parts. The start phase will be skipped on the first turn of the game, the combat phase, and the end phase. During your start phase, first you will uncommit all your cards. Then you may discard 1 card from your hand before drawing cards into your hand until you have cards in your hand equal to your hand size value. Then it's your combat phase. It's when you can play attacks, foundations, characters, and assets. If you fail to play any of these cards, then immediately move on to your end phase. This is also when you can play form abilities and action cards. If you fail to play a form ability on an action card though, then immediately move on to your end phase. You may also choose to just pass and move on to the end phase. During the end phase, you'll discard all failed cards, move assets and foundations to your staging area, attack that does demonstrate momentum, and attack that into your discard pile, characters to your character, and then pass the turn. Now let's take a look at some demo gameplay. Players randomly decide that the Midoriya player will go first, make sure their decks are well shuffled, and draw their starting hands. The Midoriya player draws 2 self-sacrifices, 1 gift from mom, 1 planning ahead, 1 heroic strike, and 1 aspiring punch. Because this player is going first, he must start with his character committed. Getting right into the combat phase, he successfully plays a planning ahead. Then he attempts to play a gift from mom. With a 3 difficulty, the 5 controls enough to play the card. After that, he goes on to attempt to play a planning ahead. He makes this check. Then, after that, he will go to play another planning ahead, and this check will also be made. After building 4 foundations, he is very happy with his turn, so he moves on to the end phase by passing, and moves his foundations to their staging area. Then on to the Bakugo player. He makes sure his characters are uncommitted, he already has a full hand size of 6, and he gets right on with his turn. Into the combat phase, he attempts to play a burst speed, and he makes the check. He quickly follows that up with an encouragement, making the check without difficulty. He then attempts to play a latent skill, but he has to commit his character to make this check correct. He goes for his 4th foundation, but he fails to make this check. With no cards ready, he has to discard his card and forcefully move on to the end phase. He puts his foundation in their stage and he passes the turn. The Midoriya player uncommits his character and fills up his hand to start his turn. Starting his combat phase, he attempts to play a setup strike, passing the check with only slight difficulty. With a difficulty of 4 to control of 3, all he has to do is commit 1 foundation to make the check correct. Now, we move on to the enhanced step. Because he played the card, that means he gets the first enhance, and he will use a second enhance ability on this card, which will get the next card, attack card he plays his turn, plus 3 speed. His opponent opts to pass, and so does he. Now that both players have passed, we move on to the block step. The Bakugo player is going to attempt to block with a monster blast. The speed of the attack plus the block modifier means that he has to check a 6 to successfully play this attack. He only checks a 5, but he does commit 1 foundation to make the check correct. Because the Bakugo player blocked a high attack with a mid block, he has to take half the damage being done by the attack. Half of 5 is 3 because we round up, so now he's left with only 25 health. But the Midoriya player does not stop it there. He goes on to play a heroic strike without any problem. The enhanced step will not start just yet. Actually, before that happens, the ability needs to kick off from the last enhanced step, which will give this attack plus 3 speed. Then he'll get his proper enhance for playing the attack, which we'll use to commit both of the last 2 cards in the Bakugo player's staging area. The Bakugo player will pass. Using self-sacrifice, he will destroy a different self-sacrifice to give this attack plus 1 damage. Bakugo passes and so does Midoriya, so then we go into the block step. But the Bakugo player is also going to pass his block. He then takes all of the 5 damage for not blocking. Midoriya player will play a couple more foundations before moving his damaging attacks to his momentum and his foundation to his staging area, passing over the turn. The Bakugo player will go through his start phase, and that's all for the demo. Hope that demo helped you understand how the game flows. We'll talk a little bit about deck building. So, when you're building a deck, you would have a minimum of 50 cards if you're playing My Academia format, and a minimum of 60 cards in normal Universus with no upper limit. Only 4 copies of any one card inside that deck. Before building this deck though, you'll have to pick a character, because it completely changed how you build this deck. Because on your character you have 3 resource symbols. Now these 3 resource symbols can be from any of the multitude that they are, but the important thing to note is that normally in Universus, you can only include cards in your deck that share at least 1 resource symbol with a resource symbol on your character. But in the My Academia format, if that's the format you're playing with, then you can only add cards in your deck that share 1 resource symbol with 1 resource symbol on your character, which means that if you're playing death, you have to go all in on death. What's on the screen now is only a general rule of thumb. Make sure you keep playtesting your deck and keep tweaking it until it works. Some terms to know. Your opponent in the game is known as your rival, but you probably guessed that. Next thing to know is remove. When something says to remove a card, it removes it from the game. Gone. Next is flip. To flip is when you flip the card face down, all its abilities are gone. Just when you destroy a card, send that card to your discard pile. When you sail a card, that card's abilities are unplayable until the end of the current turn. Your health or vitality is the amount of damage your opponent needs to do to you to win the game. Playable abilities are abilities you can use, and unplayable abilities are abilities you can't. And that's it, viewers. That's all there is to playing the My Hero Academia collectible card game, or Universus system. Please, if you want to see more gameplay to help you, check out this video here. And if you like what I did here, please consider subscribing and encourage me to make more videos in this style. I'll see you next time.